Gilberto Mora's name keeps appearing on sports headlines everywhere, and this time it is not just the Mexican media talking about him. European newspapers are also paying close attention. At only 17 years old, the young Mexican has become one of the most talked about talents in world football. Everyone seems to be discussing him, and several major clubs are reportedly interested. But according to the story making the rounds, one club may already be much closer than the rest. And that club is Real Madrid, the biggest and most successful team in football history. The same club where Mexican legends such as Javier Hernandez and the legendary Hugo Sanchez once played. Now, it seems another Mexican could be preparing to write his own chapter in Madrid. But not everything is positive. Because while much of the football world has praised Mora's talent, there is also a small group that appears uncomfortable with the attention he is receiving. And according to this narrative, much of that criticism has come from the Argentine media. For some Argentines, seeing a Mexican rise to prominence at the highest level is apparently difficult, especially after their own representative, Mastantuono, was no longer part of the club's immediate plans. Now Gilberto Mora is being presented as the player who could occupy that space. So what exactly has the Argentine press been saying? We have already discussed some of this before. Personalities such as Flavio Azaro, Daniel Fava, and Guido Glate have reportedly described Mora as an overhyped player, questioned his ability, and, on several occasions, gone beyond football criticism and attacked him personally. That is a completely different thing from analyzing a player's performance, and it certainly creates an ugly atmosphere around a young footballer. But this time, someone decided not to stay silent. And interestingly, he is not Mexican. He is an elite footballer who reportedly spoke openly about the situation and ended up putting the Argentine narrative under serious pressure. We are talking about Jude Bellingham of Real Madrid, who supposedly made a statement that immediately won over Mexican fans. It happened during a press conference before a match, and we are going to break down the key moments because what followed became much more interesting. The first question directed at the Real Madrid star was about the squad and possible reinforcements. The journalist asked which position he believed the club should strengthen or what kind of signing Madrid should make next. Bellingham's response was straightforward. He explained that he believed the squad was already extremely strong and that if everyone worked together, they could compete for the biggest trophies. Saying that something was missing, according to his answer, would almost be questioning the quality of the players already inside the dressing room. In his view, every footballer in the squad was among the best in his position. But the interviewer did not stop there. He pushed the question further and asked whether there was a particular player Bellingham personally liked or a name from the transfer rumors that he would like to see arrive at the Santiago Bernabéu. That is when the conversation reportedly became much more interesting. Bellingham acknowledged that there were several players he admired, but he also mentioned that everyone knew Real Madrid was looking for creativity in midfield. And according to the version of events presented here, the name attracting the most attention was the young Mexican. Bellingham reportedly described him as a very talented footballer and said he had already played against him. He also suggested that the youngster could become a special player, while stressing that people should not put too much pressure on him because he was still very young and had plenty of development ahead of him. Then a Mexican journalist asked the obvious follow-up question. Was he talking about Gilberto Mora? And did that mean the teenager was already going to become a Real Madrid player? Bellingham reportedly clarified that he could not officially confirm any transfer because he was neither a journalist nor the president of the club. However, he said he had heard the same reports being discussed in the media and understood that the situation was progressing. He also praised Mora's personality, saying that he had exchanged shirts with him after their World Cup meeting and had noticed that the youngster seemed mature beyond his years. According to the statement presented in this story, Bellingham even said he would love to see Mora eventually walk onto the Bernabéu pitch because, in his opinion, the best players belong at Real Madrid. That should have been enough to end the discussion. But, as often happens in a heated football debate, another journalist decided to challenge the idea. An Argentine reporter reportedly asked whether signing Gilberto Mora could actually be a risk. He questioned whether a 17-year-old Mexican could really succeed at Real Madrid and argued that Mexican players did not have enough history of succeeding at that level. He suggested that Madrid might be better off spending its money on a more established midfielder instead of gambling on a teenager. Bellingham's reported response was much sharper. He allegedly asked whether the journalist was genuinely asking for his opinion or simply trying to convince him of his own argument because it sounded like the reporter was searching for a particular headline. Bellingham repeated that Mora was a very talented player. If Real Madrid was interested in him, he said, there had to be a reason. Age alone should not determine whether someone can become a great footballer. The young Mexican had already shown that he could perform under pressure and had reportedly produced important moments for his national team. The answer reportedly left the room noticeably quieter. But the Argentine journalist was not finished. The discussion then moved toward other names associated with Real Madrid. He brought up Alexis Mac Allister and Enzo Fernandez and asked whether pursuing Mora could reduce opportunities for Mastantuono, who had only recently been sent out on loan and plays in a somewhat similar area of the pitch. The reporter wanted to know whether Bellingham believed those Argentine players should also be considered. By this point, Bellingham was reportedly becoming visibly frustrated, although he was still smiling. He repeated that he was not the president of Real Madrid and that he did not decide transfers. He explained that he had a good relationship with Mastantuono and considered him a friend, but the decision regarding his future belonged to the club. If Madrid wanted to invest in Gilberto Mora, that was a decision for the institution. Then came the more controversial part of the alleged response. Bellingham reportedly questioned why the Argentine media continued pushing rumors about Enzo Fernandez and Mac Allister when the club had supposedly already communicated that there was no serious interest. He argued that there was no reason to constantly try to put one player against another simply because they came from different countries. In his view, all of them could be talented footballers without turning the situation into a national competition. At that point, it was obvious that the conversation had become much more personal. Yet there was still one final question, and that question reportedly pushed Bellingham over the edge. An Argentine journalist argued that Argentina had plenty of young talents who could potentially perform better than Gilberto Mora. He suggested that Bellingham's support for the Mexican could be influenced by resentment over Argentina's elimination from the World Cup, and then asked whether Mora was simply the product of marketing designed to sell more Real Madrid shirts in Mexico. Bellingham's alleged response was blunt. He reportedly said there was no point answering a question that seemed designed to force a particular opinion. He questioned what Argentina's World Cup result had to do with Real Madrid's interest in a young Mexican player. He then indicated that he did not want to continue answering questions about the subject. If the journalist believed Mora was nothing special, that was his opinion. But instead of constantly attacking the player, the journalist should focus on improving his own reporting. According to the story, that was essentially where the press conference ended. Bellingham was frustrated, and many viewers interpreted his reaction as a defense of a young footballer who was simply trying to build his career. But the story did not end inside that press room. The bigger argument was about why some people were so determined to compare Gilberto Mora with Argentine midfielders. The focus quickly shifted to Alexis Mac Allister. After Luka Modric's departure, several reports had suggested that the Argentine could become the successor in midfield, with a possible transfer fee somewhere around 60 to 70 million euros. At one point, he was considered one of the names most frequently associated with Madrid. But the move never happened. Critics pointed toward his season at Liverpool and argued that his performances had not been strong enough to justify such a major transfer. The criticism became even louder when Liverpool struggled to reach the level expected of them. Mac Allister was reportedly rotated more frequently than before, and questions were raised about his physical condition and consistency. Some English football coverage even identified him as one of the weaker links in midfield. Whether those judgments were fair or not, the fact remains that Real Madrid did not move forward with the transfer. And that is where the argument surrounding Mora becomes interesting. The question is not simply whether Mac Allister is a good player. It is whether Madrid believes he is the right player at the right price and at the right stage of his career. Now we come to Enzo Fernandez, the Argentine name that has been connected with Real Madrid for months. The rumor cycle has included everything from claims about a possible move to Madrid to stories about him looking for a home in Spain and interviews in which he supposedly praised the Spanish giants. According to this narrative, there has been constant speculation that Enzo wants to leave Chelsea and eventually join Madrid. But again, the interest may not be mutual. The story claims that Real Madrid eventually made it clear that Enzo was not part of its plans. Whether that remains true or changes in the future is another question, because football transfers can change quickly. But the argument being presented is that Madrid values harmony inside the dressing room and does not want to create unnecessary controversy. Enzo Fernandez has been involved in several heated football situations, and his name became especially controversial during the World Cup period. Critics accused him of making offensive gestures, mocking opponents, and becoming involved in incidents that attracted international attention. That history is being used to explain why Madrid might hesitate. Real Madrid is often portrayed as a club that cares deeply about its image, tradition, and dressing room culture. And there is another obvious issue. How would a player such as Enzo fit into a midfield already containing players like Aurelien Tchouameni and Eduardo Camavinga, while also sharing the squad with Kylian Mbappé? The argument becomes even more complicated when considering the tensions created by previous international controversies involving Argentina and France. Whether those issues would actually affect a club transfer is impossible to know, but they have certainly become part of the public discussion. Then there is Franco Mastantuono, the Argentine prospect who was once described by parts of the Argentine media as the next major superstar. He was promoted as a future legend, with comparisons that placed enormous expectations on a teenager. Some even discussed him as a possible successor to Argentina's greatest football icons. But football does not always follow the script written by the media. Mastantuono's situation has become a major part of the debate. Instead of immediately becoming a central figure at Real Madrid, he was reportedly sent out on loan to Fiorentina, giving him an opportunity to develop through regular football. Fiorentina had finished lower in the previous Serie A campaign and were not competing at the same level as Europe's biggest clubs. For a 19-year-old, however, regular minutes can sometimes be more valuable than sitting on the bench at a giant club. The argument from Mora's supporters is that this shows the difference between the two situations. Mastantuono was already signed by Madrid and is now being given time to develop elsewhere, while Gilberto Mora is being linked with a potential future move because Madrid supposedly sees him as a different type of prospect. It is important to remember that neither path guarantees success. A young player can develop brilliantly at a smaller club, while another can struggle despite joining a giant at a young age. Still, the comparison continues because Mora has attracted interest from several major European clubs. Names such as Borussia Dortmund, Manchester United, Manchester City, Liverpool, Barcelona, and Real Madrid have all been mentioned in reports surrounding the Mexican teenager. The reason for that interest is simple. Clubs want young players who have already shown that they can handle pressure. Mora's supporters point toward his performances for Mexico and argue that he has already demonstrated the ability to compete against strong opposition. Meanwhile, questions have continued around the financial side of the potential transfer. Reports have suggested that the amount required to sign Mora could be somewhere between 25 and 35 million euros. If accurate, that would make him an extremely attractive investment for clubs capable of developing young talent. Compared with the much larger amounts sometimes spent on established stars, a teenager with enormous potential can look like a calculated long-term gamble. There are also reports claiming that Florentino Perez has been impressed by Mora and sees him as the type of creative midfielder Madrid could use in the future. The club has a long history of identifying young players before they reach their absolute peak. Madrid has previously invested in teenagers who were not yet global superstars and then developed them into elite footballers. That strategy has become one of the defining features of the modern club. And this is where the biggest question comes in. Why has Gilberto Mora attracted so much attention before even reaching his physical prime? The answer is potential. At 17, he is nowhere near the finished product. He still needs experience, strength, tactical development, and the ability to handle the enormous pressure that comes with playing for a club like Real Madrid. But that is precisely why the biggest clubs start watching players early. There is also an important detail that many people forget. Gilberto Mora is still a minor. European transfer regulations place restrictions on international transfers involving players under 18, which means a club cannot simply decide today and immediately move a 17-year-old across the Atlantic under normal circumstances. That is why a club interested in Mora would have to plan carefully and wait for the appropriate moment. This is similar to how European giants have handled other young South American talents in the past, reaching agreements early and then completing moves when the players become eligible. Real Madrid has experience with this strategy. The club has often preferred identifying talented teenagers before their market value explodes rather than waiting until every major team is fighting over them. Vinicius Jr. is one of the most famous examples of a young player signed before becoming a global superstar. Rodrigo followed a similar pathway. The idea is simple. Invest early, develop patiently, and hope the player becomes an elite star. That is reportedly the thinking behind the interest in Mora. Instead of paying an enormous fee for a proven midfielder who may or may not fit perfectly, Madrid could invest in a teenager whose potential is considered enormous. Of course, potential is never a guarantee. For every young player who becomes a superstar, there are others who never reach the level people predicted. That is the risk every club takes. But Bellingham's alleged support for Mora has added another layer to the story. A player already established at the highest level can recognize qualities that statistics do not always show. According to the story, Bellingham saw Mora up close, exchanged shirts with him, and came away impressed by both his football ability and his mentality. If that account is accurate, his opinion would certainly carry weight inside the dressing room. The idea of Bellingham defending a young Mexican against criticism has naturally created excitement among Mexican football fans. It also creates a powerful storyline because the debate is no longer simply about a transfer. It becomes a clash between different football cultures, different media narratives, and different expectations. But there is one thing Mora should avoid above everything else: listening to the noise. Whether the criticism comes from Argentina, Mexico, Spain, England, or anywhere else, a 17-year-old footballer cannot allow outside opinions to control his development. The only thing that matters is continuing to improve, staying focused, and making the right decisions for his career. And now, after hearing the entire story, the question becomes much more interesting. Who would you choose? Would you build around established names such as Mac Allister and Enzo Fernandez? Trust the potential of Mastantuono? Or take the enormous gamble on a 17-year-old Gilberto Mora who has already captured the attention of some of Europe's biggest clubs? For me, the most fascinating part is not even the rivalry between Mexico and Argentina. It is the possibility that a teenager from Tijuana could eventually walk into the Santiago Bernabéu and become one of the most important Mexican footballers of his generation. If that happens, all the arguments, criticism, and headlines will become secondary. The football will decide everything. So tell us in the comments, who do you believe has the highest ceiling? The established Argentine midfielders who already have experience at the highest level, or the young Mexican talent who is only beginning his journey? The answer may look obvious today, but football has a funny way of changing everything. And remember, Gilberto Mora is only 17. His story is just beginning. If the reports about Real Madrid are correct, the next chapter could be one of the biggest moments in Mexican football history. Whether he ends up at Madrid, another European giant, or somewhere completely unexpected, the pressure will be enormous. But so will the opportunity. This is exactly why young players need support rather than unnecessary hatred. Criticism of football is normal. Debate is part of the sport. But personal attacks against a teenager accomplish nothing. Let the kid play. Let him develop, and let his performances answer the critics. As for Jude Bellingham, whether every detail of this reported press conference turns out to be exactly as described or not, the larger message remains powerful. Talented young footballers should be judged by what they can become and by what they show on the pitch, not by the passport they carry. And if Gilberto Mora really does have the qualities that so many scouts and clubs reportedly see in him, then we may be watching the beginning of something very special. So, what do you think? Is Gilberto Mora genuinely ready for the biggest stage? Or is the hype moving faster than his development? And if Real Madrid really has him on its radar, should the club make the move as soon as possible or allow him more time to develop in Mexico? Leave your opinion in the comments because this debate is only getting started. Hello everyone, this is your World Cup granny. In my opinion, Gilberto Mora should ignore the noise, keep working, follow his own path, and focus on becoming the best version of himself. If Europe really is waiting for him, then let his football do the talking. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Nota Mundialista, because we will be following every major update surrounding Gilberto Mora, Real Madrid, and the future of Mexican football.